Good morning, dear friends. Welcome to Conscious Living, the Spirit Group virtual meeting. And it's such a pleasure to be here together. It's such a bless that we took this time to be together and be fed by the word of Jesus, or the word of the Lord. And today we have a special friend here with us, Danielle from the Spirit Society of San Diego. So we're very happy that he joined us here today. So while people are coming, some people are coming already, so welcome. So we are going to do a reading for our book, Happy Life. And the lesson today is, Jesus said, man does not live by bread alone, but also by God's word. Concerns relative to food, clothing, housing, and social interaction should not come at the expense of one's interest in the spiritual life. Set time aside daily to nourish yourself with the God's word. Bread feeds the body, while faith upholds the soul. Bread strengthens matter, whereas faith dignifies life. Bread briefly satiates hunger, but faith fulfills our needs for good. Care for your body and nurture your soul, so you may feel complete. Especially in these days, it's so important that we take the time to feed our soul. And that's why we are so happy that you join us, because in this moment, for sure, our soul will be fed by the lessons of Jesus. So with that saying, so welcome Fatima that just arrived and many others that are here. So we are going to start our prayer. So invite everyone to join us. Kind Heavenly Father, we are so thankful and grateful that even though in these difficult days we are not physically present with each other, but we have this platform so we can be together, unite our hearts, elevate our thoughts together to praise you, Lord, that is with us all the time. So we ask in the name of Jesus that guide us through the morning. Help this study to feed our soul in moments that we are in so need of consolation and hope. May you be calm, and may the light of Jesus enter our home, giving all of us the opportunity to calm ourselves so we can truly hear, genuinely hear the lessons today. We ask our good spirits that get closer to our friend Daniel so he can be inspired while he shares his study with us. So bless all of us that are here present. Bless everyone that is starting entering this platform. And bless everyone that has the intention to be with us soon. So may the light of Jesus be with us. In Jesus' name we pray. So be it. So our friends, we have Daniel Assis with us, straight from California. We thank you because it's very early for you. So we thank you and welcoming you for our meeting. Okay?
Thank you. Good morning, friends. It's still morning for you, so I can still say this. It is definitely morning out here in California, where we're 3 hours behind. But I just want to say thank you. Good morning and happy Sunday. It's always a pleasure to be here with you guys. Spiritism has given me two gifts, I always say. One of them is to have access to a whole new understanding about life and the world around us. And the second one is the opportunity to make new wonderful friends in different parts of the world, friends that I would otherwise would never have met were it not for Spiritism. So I am very excited, doubly excited to be here with you today. Our topic for today is calming the storm. And I think it's an interesting topic because many of us often feel like our life is in disarray. Many of us always feel that our life is out of control. And sometimes it feels like we are in a boat in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of a storm. We just don't know what's happening, and we are afraid and we are worried about different things. And especially in these times where we are going through the COVID scare, the COVID-19 pandemic, it often feels like we could all be in the middle of the ocean in a boat with big waves around us. It often feels very scary. And let's call it out. We are all really afraid sometimes of what could happen to us, and whether we could die, whether we could lose people that we love. And in many different ways, these are some of our biggest fears. Sometimes we're not even aware they're there. They're so strong that we don't even realize that we are really afraid of death, afraid of losing people, afraid of all these other things that are around us, potentially, especially in these difficult times. So what we want to do today is go back to a little story, a very short story, but a beautiful, powerful story, in the Gospel of Mark, to see if there are any tips that we can grasp from Jesus' teachings about calming our storm, calming these difficult situations in our lives, these different feelings that we sometimes have, in a way that is that speaks both to our heart and to our minds. And I really do think that Spiritism, bringing its rational perspective, lends itself very well to the idea of giving us extra understanding and perceptions and awareness about the world around us to help us calm our own storm. The question really is, Jesus has calmed the storm outside, but can we calm our inner storm? So I hope that you join me. And if you have any questions or comments, you can pop into the chat. The folks here at the Conscious Living Spiritist group have been very kind to make that available for you. So we say hi. We say hi to our friends from the Kardec group. We say hi from Ed Nilsson to Juan to Fatima and to everybody who's joining us. And thank you for the folks from the Kardec group who are 8 hours ahead. So different time zones, different parts of the world connecting here today. What a joy it is to be here and to be able, as Abigail said, to be able to connect in this platform, even if we can't do that physically. All right, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about calming the storm. I think we all know this story. We all know the story of Jesus getting in a boat with the disciples, a storm coming, and him calming the storms. But can we dive a little deeper? Can we take a different perspective and apply that to our lives? So join with me in this trip for a little bit of a journey here, and let's see what we can do together. All right, you guys ready? Let's do it. Okay, so as I said, this is from the Gospel of Mark, one of the 4 Gospels on the New Testament. And it's really a really short story, as most of the stories in the Gospel are, but it's packed with wisdom. So what I want to do is just want to read it really quickly with you, and then we can take one little verse at a time and spend some time, not too much, because our time is always short, but just enough, I hope, to be able to whet your appetite so that you can dive deeper and reflect on these beautiful lessons that our older brother, this incredibly evolved spirit called Jesus, or the Christ, has left us with. So the story goes in Mark, and this is, I should say, according to the New International Version, right, the language here. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, he being Jesus, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall, which is a tempest in the ocean, came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Let's go back here. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still not have faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So I think you get the gist of this, right? The story here really is simple. Jesus tells them, let's go get to the other side. They hop on a boat. Jesus falls asleep on the boat. A tempest comes, right? A storm comes, and they start getting really worried about it. And Jesus is sleeping in a storm. And how could he possibly be sleeping on a storm? I love that part. We can talk about that a little bit later. Then they're so afraid that they wake Jesus up. Jesus calms the storm and asks them, why is it that this was so worrisome for you? Don't you already know? And in the process, they really, really think about, wow, how can he possibly do that? How can he calm a storm outside? So it's a very simple story that for many of us seems almost like fairy tale, almost like a childlike mythology of sorts. But when we apply our spiritist knowledge and our understanding of life after life, and reincarnation and spiritual evolution, and begin to understand the world anew, it becomes a little bit more than that. So let's kind of put our spiritist minds together to try to decipher what could be behind this word. So let's do this. So we're going to break it into the different verses, right? So we're going to chunk it out into 6 different pieces. And we're going to visit each one really quickly and see what kind of insights we can gain from that. Let's start with the idea of the other side, right? So in verse 35, it goes, that day, when the evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. And I think that's a really interesting perspective, because when we start to think about the story a little bit, we wonder, why is it? Why is it that they have decided to go into the ocean, in this case, a big lake, right? Why have they decided to go into that ocean, the big lake, in the evening when there were no lights, right? Because there was no electric lights at the time. Wouldn't it be smarter if they waited for the morning when there was light? Wouldn't it be a lot less scary if that was the case? And I think that from the beginning, we begin to understand that there's something special going on about the story here. This is a little bit more than it meets the eyes. So let's think about this for a second. That day, when evening came up, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. So what is the other side? So when we begin to think with our spiritual eyes, we understand that that we're really talking about this interesting place that we find ourselves in as a community in this planet. We really need to get to that destination. We need to get to the other side of the ocean. We really need to fulfill our evolutionary plans. We really need to evolve. And so getting to the other side is symbolic from going to the new area, to this new place, to this new destination that we need to get to. And the time of day that this takes place in the evening, like I said, is also very interesting because it tells us that we must go now. Jesus calls us to go now because we could have and should have gone earlier in the day, but we didn't. And now that the light is running out on us, we must hurry up and try to get to the other side as fast as we can because we did not start earlier. And so we find ourselves in this moment, in this planetary transition, where the world around us is all bucking up and it's all wild. But that's because it's in a transformation process. And we haven't got the other side. We haven't been able to reach this process of evolutionary growth in a way that we should. So Jesus is saying, get to the boat. We got to go. Time is running out. Let's do it. And so that is why we're rushing into things, right? That's why we're going in the middle of the evening when the light's about setting, because we just have to do it. So this idea of going to the other side is one that we begin to see frames our perspective of what's happening with the world right now. There is a moment of planetary transition where our whole planet needs to evolve, needs to get to the other side of things. And because we have somewhat delayed ourselves, we now need to rush and we need to kind of get in the boats now and go. So we are forced to travel in less than optimal circumstances, but we need to go anyways because time is nigh. Time is here. We need to do it. So that's a perspective for us to contemplate there, that as we see this with our spirit's eyes, we see that the moment that we live in, it's a moment of transition. And it's understandable that we are going to see all kinds of different challenges along the way. But we also have to keep the eye on the prize. And that is to say, we have to keep our larger perspective here, understanding that we need to get into the ocean to get to the other side. We need to go through these challenges that we face today to the other side. When we came into this body, when we were born, when we reincarnated into this body, we did so not so that we could have vacation, not so that we could put our feet in the air and just enjoy things. We came here to problem solve, to learn, to grow, to face challenges so that we can evolve, much the same way that when we take a test in school, we don't take it for fun. We take it to see whether we learn things or not. And then what is it that we can study and grow from afterwards? So the first lesson that we take is perspective, and make sure that we understand that even though all the challenges around us can be very pressing, this is a moment of growth for us. This is an opportunity for development, and we are going to get to the other side. So let's go to verse number 2 to see what else we have that could be interesting for us as well. So verse number 2, verse 36, it's really interesting because it says, leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. And I think this is really interesting because I ask myself, wow, what is the boat? Like, what is the symbolism of the boat? Because we see here that from the beginning, they left the crowd behind, right? And they took him along. They took Jesus along just as he was. There was no time to pack. There was no time to prepare. There was no time to take anything else. They just got in the boat and went. And that is surprising in itself. But it's also telling in many different ways that there is no more time for preparations for this travel, for this trip. It's time to go. We just have to do it. We've been telling ourselves for a while that, you know what, I'm going to study a little bit more. I'm going to do a little bit more. And then I'm going to finally do it. And we've been postponing the trip. But now it's time for us just to get in the boat and go. We have to go. We have to go through this process of growth and development. We need to do it. Spiritually speaking, we've reincarnated for this. I also like the idea of leaving the crowd behind because it tells us that although we're all one big family, we can't always move at the same pace, and we can't always acquiesce to the will of the crowd. We have to do that which we think is right for our growth and our development. So we get into little boats and we get into the ocean. And I love that idea because if you think about it, getting into a little boat is getting into a place with a couple of people and going into that journey with those people. And it's not different when we look at it with our spirit eyes than reincarnating. It's not different than saying we are going to take a physical body and we are going to go in this wonderful journey with a group of people, with our family, the family that we are going to reincarnate with. And we're going to count on them to help us navigate that boat. The boat is no cruise control people, right? Everybody in the boat has to help. And so when we get into the boat, it's a symbol that for us to cross the ocean, it's not feasible always for us to all get into the same boat or just walk over all together. We have to get into little groups, develop relationships in the little groups that will help us navigate that ocean so we can get there. So even though sometimes it may feel like we are alone and there's only a couple of people around us, it's important us to remember that this verse also tells us that there were also boats with him. So it's not just one boat crossing the ocean. There are many boats together crossing the ocean. Sometimes we just don't see the boat that's over there or the boat that's over here because we're so worried with our own storm, but they're all there. So it's important for us to keep that in mind because sometimes we feel lonely out there in the ocean, but there's so many different boats also traveling together. And when we think about this, it may help alleviate this feeling of loneliness and solitude because there's so many boats out there. There's so many other people going through the same journey that we are. They might not be in the same boat at the same time, but they're in a similar boat, traveling along in the same direction, always trying to go the same way. And that's a really good reminder Reminder that we're not alone, a reminder for us to have patience and tolerance with each other, because we're all just trying to cross to the other side. We may not know very well how to do it, but we're all there. So holding in our hearts this higher perspective about spirituality, reincarnation, rebirth, and spiritual evolution, we can begin to see what's really going on here. It's not just adventure of one person, but it really is the traveling of many people, of which we happen to be one, right? So let's go on for the interest of time to see if we can get to other things as well. We could dive into these things a lot more, of course. And if you have questions or comments, just pop them in there and we'll try to tackle them either now or as we go along. So thank you for being here. All right, so that's verse number 2. Let's make our transition to the next one. This is where it really starts to get interesting, right, people? This is about the storm. This verse 37 says, a furious squall, which is a storm in the ocean, came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. So imagine this. Imagine waves that are so big that they come over the boat and splash into the deck. And remember, the boats at the time weren't as big as our boats are today. So the waves are even scarier in that sense, right? Because if you've been in a small boat, it's very different than being in a transatlantic boat or in a cruise ship, right? It's just a very different experience. If you have had a chance to do that, you will know that sometimes you don't even feel the sway in a cruise ship, but in a smaller boat, you'll feel it, right? So imagine that visually, how scary that is to be in a boat in the middle of the ocean with the lights are fading. You really don't have other lights. Maybe you have candle lights, maybe. And it's dark, and the waves are just crushing it. And you can imagine why the story sometimes is so powerful, because sometimes that's how we feel in our lives. Sometimes that's exactly how we think the world is taking place before our eyes, that we are just in this little boat in the middle of the ocean, just trying to lead our lives, and the waters come in, and the boat's rocking, and it seems like everything is not going to work out. It gets so difficult that we can't even remember where we're going. We're just so worried of making it right now, of just not being swept by this wave that's coming in. We forget where we're going, who we're going with. We're just so focused on not going overboard that everything becomes secondary. Everything is really scary, right? And I want to make a pause here, and I want to call it out. That our fear of the storm really is not the fear of water or the boat. It's really the fear of dying. It's really the fear of death, of not existing anymore. Sometimes we don't rationalize it because it's so ingrained in us, but what we're really afraid of, whether we are in a boat in the ocean, in the middle of a storm, where we are in the storm of a global pandemic, what we really are afraid of death. And that's a fascinating perspective, because what if I were to tell you that even if the worst thing that could possibly happen, which is us falling off the boat and drowning and losing our physical lives, what if I were to tell you that none of that would stop making you who you are? None of that would be the end of you. None of that would erase you from the world. As we learn about spiritism, mediumship, reincarnation, we understand that this is our physical journey, one of many other physical journeys that we've had, and many others that we will likely have too. And even when we lose our physical lives here, we don't stop being who we are. All that we have gathered, all that whom we have met, they continue with us in this incredible journey, the spiritual journey, even if we don't remember it right now. So although it is very scary to potentially lose our lives, we should also spend some time thinking about how reassuring it can be to know that who I am is not this physical body, and that I will survive anything that life throws at me. Even if I lose my physical body, I will still continue to be me, and I will still continue to evolve through time and space. And when that happens, it helps us gather our thoughts a little bit more and be a little bit less scary of the storm outside. It doesn't mean that we are not going to be prudent. It does not mean that we're not going to take care of ourselves and others. It does not mean that we are not going to learn how to swim or that we are going to put our masks on for the pandemic. It just means that we are able to calm ourselves down a little bit and take perspective of things and know that even if the worst thing that could happen, if we lose our lives or we lose the lives of those around us, we're still connected. Because the bonds of love, they don't break with death. That, fortunately, we have known through Spiritism since the 1850s, when we've been able to understand how spirit communication takes place. And we know through mediumship, through the wonderful books that we have who have come from spirit, that the bonds of love we build in this life, they last for eternity. And what a beautiful thought it is, isn't it? Think about it for a second. Everybody that you have ever met will continue to love you, whether they're here or they are without a body, where they're discarnate. It's amazing. There's a lot of love coming our way that we might even not know about it. Because even if they have passed, they continue to love us. Just the same way that if we had passed now, we continue to love the people who are here. So these bonds of love are amazing. And they're even more incredible when we think that we have had many lifetimes before that we don't remember right now for our own good. And in those lives, we also had many people who also loved us and who have continued to love us, even if we don't remember them. That means, people, that when we do the math, there are so many people who care about us from a spiritual perspective, that are loving us and sending us their best, that we don't even remember. We are receiving the love, even if we're not aware. It takes a mindset for us to be able to calm our minds down and be able to perceive that and take that in. And so how do we do it? How do we take that love and how do we take this bigger perspective? How do we put things into effect? Let's go to our next verse and see what's happening here, because I think it's really, really interesting. In this verse, let's read it together. Verse 38. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And I find this verse so interesting, people. There's so much in here. First of all, let's be frank here. Who can sleep in the middle of a storm? If the boat was rocking in the middle of the ocean, who would actually be able to be peacefully sleeping on the back of the boat, on a cushion? Jesus. And I think that tells you that that tells you something special. You are really only able to sleep through that storm if you're really sound asleep, if you're really relaxed about what's going on. I think that the reason why Jesus is really able to sleep here, because he has fully understood the spiritual reality around him and us, that even if we were to lose our lives, everything was going to be okay. That moment was not as scary for Jesus as it is for us, because Jesus has got to a point where he thinks about things spiritually, whereas we're still thinking most of the time materially. We're still worried with our physical bodies rather than with developing our virtues and growing our spiritual perspective. When he is fully aware of things, he's not worried about the storm outside because he is okay inside. But there's something else that I want to talk about that I also find fascinating here is the symbolism of him sleeping on our boats. You see, it would have been very easy for Jesus to send us in the trip and point us to the other side and say, "So long, good job on your trip." But he actually got in the boat with us. And I think that's beautiful. He's sending us and moving us along, but he's with us. He's with us in the journey, even when we don't realize it. In fact, symbolically speaking, having Jesus asleep in our boat really means that he's asleep in our hearts. Because we have let these teachings that we have learned through spirituality of love, of the spiritual life, or of being kind to each other or moving forward, asleep in our souls and in our society a little bit. So in a way, what I'm saying is it feels like this moment that we're going through is the moment where we're in the middle of the storm. The world seems to be going chaotic. because we have forgotten about Jesus and his teachings, what he stands for, what he has come here to show. We have forgotten about all this, so he sleeps. But when he gets really bad, then we remember, and then we go back to him. And we say things like this, which I think is fascinating. Teacher, don't you care if we drown? It's really passive aggressive, isn't it? It's really saying, hold on a second, are you going to let us die? Right? It's really like demanding something of Jesus. I think it shows the mindset that we have, that we only go when we want something for ourselves. We just worry about ourselves, and that's okay. But we're still thinking about it because we haven't got, the spiritual light bulb hasn't gone on yet in our minds to understand that even if we were to lose our physical bodies, we're going to be okay. So here it is in this moment of our lives where we got to ask ourselves, is Jesus awake, or is Jesus sleeping in my boat? That is to say, let me rephrase that. Am I really leading with the spiritual, or am I focusing only on the material? The message that Abigail read in the beginning was wonderful, where we are suggested to think about our spiritual selves a little bit every day, so we don't let the Jesus in us sleep. Because once the Jesus in us sleeps, we get worried about the storm around us. But once Jesus awakens within us, then the storm changes. And let's take a bigger perspective of things, and let's see how this story shifts and how this story goes into a whole different way of looking at things, and how it changes completely when Jesus awakes. And that's what happens in verse 39. This is the moment. In verse 39, we see, he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? So think about it with me. When we awaken the Jesus within us, when we understand the teachings that are for us and have always been here from him, we can quiet the waves of the world. They can calm down because we're no longer so worried about them. We're no longer really fearful of anything else that can happen, because we understand that as spiritual beings, we are going to outlast and survive anything this life can throw at us. And even if we discarnate, even if we die, we're still going to be okay. We're still going to go on our journey, because I'm going to tell you a little secret. You have died before, many times in different lives. You just don't remember it. So the fear of death goes away a little bit. I always tell people that I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of dying. And I think that is what happens when we begin to understand things. Now that Spiritism has given us an understanding of life after life and the fact that we outlive our physical bodies, the fear of death really goes away. Now, I still am afraid of how am I going to die. I'm still worried that whether I'm going to feel pain or not. That's still there. But I find myself surprised by the idea more and more that death is not as big deal as it used to be before. Because I know what's in the other side. Spiritism has been telling us what's in the other side. All religions and religious thinking processes and systems and doctrines and philosophies, or whatever you want to call, have always pointed to life after life. They have always promised that there's something on the other side. But it was only with Spiritism that we had ultimate proof of what that looked like. We were told there was something, but Spiritism literally showed us empirically, and continues to do so via our mediumistic meetings that we have every week in different Spiritist groups throughout the world, that the world after this one, or with this one, is there. It's real. And so when that takes place in our heart, when that takes hold in our souls, it helps us calm the storm or worries about the world outside, because this is not the only chance that we have of doing things. This is not the only chance we have of getting things right. This is not the only moment that we will ever have. We will have many moments, one after the other. So it's okay to breathe and understand that everything that we see outside of ourselves is somewhat of a mirage, somewhat of an illusion. Because what really matters, it's invisible to the soul. We cannot see it in this world. It's not easy for us to see. Who you are looking today at, it's not who I really am. This happens to be the body that I'm in. Now, what I'm telling you, what I do, what I think about, that's who I am. And it's hard for us to get to know each other at that level because we're so worried about the physical piece. We only see the physical, or we see the physical first, so it's understandable. But the calling of the moment, the awakening of Jesus within us, is to ask us to look at something differently. Because once we see that perspective, the winds die down, and the winds give direction to things, right? Without winds, you can't really have big waves. So when we are able to control our minds and see things differently, the challenges outside, even if they remain the same, they won't be as scary. We will be able to be like Jesus, where he is in the middle of waves and a squall, and he's okay with himself to the point that he can rest and sleep. And I think that's what his message is, because he turns around after he brings these messages to us, after we internalize that into our hearts and we're able to calm our own spirit. He asks us again poignantly, why are you so afraid? Didn't we tell you about all these things? Do you have no faith? Have you not understood all these things that we've been talking about? 2,000 years ago, he comes to be with us, to show us that death is not the end of things. His whole message on this earth is about resurrection. It's about coming back after death and winning over the world. And sometimes we've forgotten this. And we do everything we can to avoid dying. I'm not saying let's die quickly. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But I'm saying dying is part of the physical experience. So let's prepare for that by living as well as we can, enjoying the moments that we have, and growing understanding about the spiritual world, because it's going to happen. As our friend Benjamin Franklin said, there are two certainties in life, right? Death and taxes. But when we begin to understand the spiritual world, there is no death. And that's a fascinating thing. Spirituality basically kills death. And when there is no death, your perspective about how you live your life begins to change. But sometimes it is really hard for us to understand that. And that's no surprise then that the disciples have this answer. They were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. How could they be terrified of Jesus? They are terrified of this incredible power because they haven't fully understood yet of all that it is. Who is this figure? Who is this man? Who is this spirit who has come to be with us 2,000 years ago, who is leading us through the storm, who has given us so much knowledge that only now we are beginning to understand? Who is this incredible messenger of the divine that brings us so much wisdom that it's able to show us how to calm our storms, how to conquer all the challenges and the fears that we have within ourselves? Because you see, friends, the true challenge here, it's not the outside storm. The outside storm, it's always going to be here. The true storm that we have to address is our inner storm, is the storm of our feelings, our expectations, our fears, our desires that are unmet, our insecurities. That is the storm that rages on in our souls, in our hearts. And that's really what gets us afraid of everything else. That's really what keeps us awake at night, because we haven't been able to deal with the storm here. And because our storm is here and it's not yet fulfilled and we haven't sailed through it, everything in the world that we see looks like what's in here. But if you're happy in here, if you're able to conquer all those fears, then the world outside will be okay. We see our outside world the way we see our inside world. And Jesus comes to us, these teachings that we learn, that we specifically understand better through spiritism and reincarnation and mediumship, help us see the world different. And when we see the world differently, everything changes. When we look at things in a different way, they look different, even if they are the same. So it is possible, friends, to be happy and content, even in the middle of all this havoc that's wreaking outside. It's possible for us to have moments of joy and happiness, even in the middle of a pandemic. You shouldn't feel bad for that. We don't forget what's happening, but it's okay for you to be content and happy with what you have in your lives right now, even if you are in the middle of a storm. In fact, take the moment to do that. Take the moment to be grateful for being close to your son, your wife, your daughter, your mother, for having those in your life. Take the moment to understand that you have so much going for you and that you are not alone and that you're in the process of going from one side to the next. Because when we look at the bigger picture, we remember that the reason why we are here, the reason why we're here now, is because we were born for this moment. We literally prepared and came and asked to be here, to face these challenges that we have today, because we know that we need to get to the other side. We need to travel through this earthly experience in the middle of this pandemic and this fear and everything else, because it's time. Jesus is with us and he's saying, go forward. So we must. We haven't done that before. We must do it now. We can no longer delay. And to do that, we get in a boat, a small boat, a group of people, in our families, in our family circle of friends, and we navigate together so that we can help each other, because we cannot go with everybody. It's not about doing what everybody wants. It's about learning what is it that we want and learning to navigate these difficulties of life, these challenges. And we do that in a group. And there are many other groups with us. And then when we find ourselves in the middle of the storm, that's when we really are tested. And then we remember that in the middle of a storm, in the middle of our most difficult moments, in the middle of life's scariest difficulties, that we have Jesus with us in the boat. And we go to Jesus, even if it's just because of fear. We go to him and say, what teachings, what spiritual teachings are there to put our minds at ease? And he says, calm the waves, calm the wind. As if to remind us that when we remember our spiritual essence, the challenges and troubles of the world diminish. They don't seem as difficult as they were before. They don't seem as daunting as they were before, because we see the bigger picture, and that calms us down. And when Jesus awakens within us, when Jesus awakens in our heart, we can do that too. We can calm our own storm by taking a moment off our days to just think about ourselves as spiritual beings and reminding ourselves of the teachings that we have received through the times about the permanence of life, the immortality of the soul, of the fact that there's so much love for us out there all the time. We're just so worried about our boat that we forget. We forget all of these things because we're just worried about the water coming in. But when we remember these things, the water does not matter that much, because we're going to be okay. And then we are really fascinating by this incredible older brother of ours, the Jesus, the Christ, who continues to be with us, who takes his time to be in our journeys, in our boats, who points us to the other way and leads by example and reminds us every single day that we want to be reminded that we are going to conquer everything that is thrown away, because God is a God of love. And if God gives us challenges, it's because we're able to overcome them. God would never give us a challenge that we could not bear, because that would be unfair. So everything that is thrown our ways can be handled. And it will be. It might not turn out the way we want it to, but we are going to figure it out. It's going to do us some good. And it's a beautiful awareness when we begin to shift this mindset from thinking in the spiritual world, from thinking in the material world, like the disciples in the boat, to thinking as a spiritual perspective as Jesus sleeping on the boat. So do we want to be worried about life, or do we want to be content about life? Because the recipe is in front of us. If we think about the spiritual first, as we saw again in Abigail's message in the beginning, life begins to transform within us. So my sincerest wishes is that wherever you may find yourself in this journey, whether you are in the middle of the storm or you're beginning to see the storm dying down because of your understanding of the world, that you may be content with what you have and what you are, that you might remind yourself that you're a spiritual being, that you're going to be okay. Being okay does not mean not facing problems. Being okay means being okay while you're facing problems, because we know that we were born to face challenges and to grow. And nobody can do that by staying at the shore. We have to get in the boat if we want to become skilled sailors. We can't just stand on the shore and tell the ship to go. We have to go with it if we want to go places. And so from the bottom of my heart, I hope that you may continue to travel in your journey, and that you may be able to, as I'm sure you will in one way or another, conquer any of the storms that come your way with the certainty that you are loved always, that you're cared for, that your older brother is watching you on behalf of your father, your mother, God, and that everything is going to pan out. But we may continue to go on. We must continue to go on. We must continue to get to the other side, because the evening is upon us. And it's time for us to make this transition where we are going to pay attention more to our spiritual values than to our material worries. So I hope that you may stay. I hope that you may stay with Jesus in your heart. Think about it in a different way. I hope that you may go back to that part in Mark and think about things differently. Find your way of understanding the message, because when we have this new understanding, we change the way we see life, and it transforms you, and it transforms you for the better. So thank you for your time, and may you always continue to grow with the blessings of Jesus in our heart.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for this wonderful message and for the reminder, as John Raphael said. Thank you for reminding us how the gospel and Jesus' letters are consoling to our heart. I love the boat ride. Everything's changed perspective, that's for sure. So to finish our meeting, would you be okay if we do our prayer, closing prayer for us? It would be a little gift, another drop of love for us. Thank you.
Oh, if you're not tired of listening to my voice, of course, I'll be glad to. So in this beautiful Sunday, when there are so many different things out in the world at the same time, when there's so much pain and fear and anger and hatred, let us remember that there's also love, that love conquers all things. So we raise our minds and our hearts up to our older brother and ask for clarity, so that we may have a moment to pause in our lives, to center ourselves, to take a breath, and tell ourselves that we are children of God, that we are going to be okay, because God is with us, because our older brother set us in this way, because we have prepared to face all these challenges that we're facing today, no matter how difficult they may seem. It does not mean they are going to disappear tomorrow, but we ask for assistance from our mentors and guides, from Christ, our brother, from God, so that we may continue to have the fortitude to be able to face all the challenges in our lives with a growth mindset, thinking about how can we improve as I go through this, awakening the Jesus in our boat in the middle of our storm, so that we can rethink the way we look at the world. We ask for clarity so that we may be less afraid. And when we are less afraid, we're able to act better. So we ask for clarity. We ask for kindness. And we hope that we too can be helpers inside our own boat, understanding that in this journey, we're not alone. So we ask for the strength to help those who are in our boat, to serve as good partners to those that are around us, to be helpful to the world around us, because we know that everybody's traveling the same journey together. So thank you, God, for the kindness you extend to us every single day by giving us each other, by reminding us that we don't have to travel alone, that we have others in our boat, and that Jesus is always with us. May we take Jesus with us through our lives and to the rest of our Sundays. Thank you, God, for all that we have. So be it.
Thank you very much, Danielle, and thank your family, because I know it's very early in the morning for you guys. Thank you for sharing the time with us, and very nice to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, dear friends, we are closing our meeting. And just a little reminder that we have the QR code on top right. Just open the camera and scan, and you'll be able to do a little donation if you can. It would help immensely our home. And I need to remind it as well that every morning, Sunday morning, 9:30, we have the gospel study, 9:30, with David Walkden leading the group. So take a time to get to know this group and get to know more about the gospel, because as we see in this lecture, how much the gospel is a consoling to our heart. And we also have the study of the book from Andrea Luiz, Missionaries of Light, every other Wednesday. So there are plenty of opportunity to study. Okay? So I wish everyone a wonderful Sunday, a wonderful week, and God help us to be together next Sunday again. So be it.